State leaders say they've been told to expect up to 25 buses of migrants each day.
9 more buses carrying people arrived in Chicago today. That is the most in one day ever.
Migrant buses coming from Texas are now stopping in the suburbs. There's a crackdown, as you know, a new one here in Chicago.
In a city known for welcoming all, the situation in Chicago takes a dramatic turn. Now stopping the hundreds of buses filled to the brim with migrants, some asylum seekers, and others illegal immigrants with criminal backgrounds.
The city of Chicago has impounded a migrant bus for the first time.
This bold step challenges the Windy City's promise of shelter. With laws that guarantee shelter for those in need, the city faces a real test, managing this surge without turning its back on its values. It's a moment that asks, what happens when the Windy City meets a logistical nightmare?
From police stations to airports to shelters, Chicago city leaders are feeling the pressure to find more money, resources, and space for migrants.
The city's budget is already tense and under immense pressure, sparking debate among city officials and leaders about the cause of action.
Another migrant shelter in Chicago closes its doors.
The city of Chicago has closed 4 temporary migrant shelters, saying the individuals have been moved to other shelters.
Over the past year and a half, more than 35,000 new arrivals have been welcomed here in Chicago from the southern border.
I know folks may have questions about my style, but don't question my leadership.
Stay with us as we delve deeper into Chicago's migrant crisis. The influx of migrants.
OEMC estimates that 7 buses of migrants will arrive in Chicago today. This follows the at least 7 coach buses full of migrants that arrived in Chicago yesterday. In fact, just a few minutes ago, another coach bus full of migrants pulled up right beside us.
Hundreds of buses have arrived in Chicago over the past months, each carrying individuals and families in search of safety, opportunity, and a new beginning.
Hundreds of migrants from the southern border arrive in Chicago today on coach buses. This woman arrived in Chicago today with her 2 children after crossing the border in Mexico.
But with every bus that rolls in, the city's resources are stretched thinner, and the administration's response is put to the test.
Officials from the Department of Homeland Security telling NBC News that the number of migrants illegally crossing the U.S.-Mexico border has risen since the start of September, with Border Patrol apprehending 7,500 migrants just on this Sunday alone.
It has become clear that although some migrants have their best intentions with them, not everybody has good intentions. Chicago will face waves of immigrants, and some with criminal backgrounds. Mayor Brandon Johnson, once celebrated for his progressive policies, now faces criticism for his handling of this unprecedented situation.
This is a global crisis. These are asylum seekers. These are not illegal people. The moment they step on American soil, they are now officially protected by international law.
The mayor is doubling down on the importance of helping the asylum seekers.
Critics argue that his approach, focusing on migrant support, has come at a significant cost to the city's most vulnerable residents.
These South and West Side homeowners are angry. They believe the city has overextended itself and should be putting the tens of millions of dollars earmarked for migrants into Chicago's most vulnerable neighborhoods.
But the South Side has been under-resourced, underfunded for years, for decades. We have schools that need to be reopened.
Let's talk numbers, because they don't lie. The city's budget, already tight with demands from public health, education, and safety, is now being diverted to manage the migrant crisis. Emergency shelters, food, healthcare, the costs are mounting. And as millions are spent, Chicagoans are left asking, is this the best use of our city's funds?
Wall-to-wall tents. Every square inch of the sidewalk in front of the 18th Police District is used for sheltering migrants. There is so little room left. Adriana Colina and her family were forced to find space under a tree across the street.
Critics point out a lack of a long-term strategy. They argue that while the immediate needs of migrants must be addressed, there's a glaring oversight in planning for the future. How will Chicago sustain this level of support? And what happens to the city's homeless, the impoverished, and the youth in need of those same resources?
The mayor's office confirming tonight that the type of giant framed tents that are currently being used to house migrants in New York City are similar to what Chicago is looking to do to ease the migrant housing crisis here. The mayor and his team briefing members of the city council about the limited details of the plan this afternoon, saying each tent would house 500 to 1,000 people.
The administration's fiscal decisions have sparked a heated debate. On one side, proponents of Mayor Johnson's policies argue that this is a humanitarian issue, above all. On the other, critics accuse the mayor of prioritizing new arrivals over Chicago's own, stretching the city's goodwill and wallet too thin. As the city navigates this crisis, the balance between compassion and pragmatism has never been more precarious. The story of Chicago's migrant influx is not just about those arriving on buses. It's about the city as a whole. How we manage this crisis will define us for generations to come. The housing challenges.
With more than 15,000 new arrivals in the past year, city leaders say the #1 priority is getting people out of police stations. Right now, the largest housing effort is a $29 million plan to establish tent base camps ahead of the winter.
As hundreds of buses roll into Chicago, each unloading passengers carrying little more than hope, a question looms large. Where will they all go? The city, grappling with a housing shortage that predates the current administration, now faces an unprecedented challenge. A challenge Mayor Brandon Johnson's critics say he's ill-prepared to meet. Let's dive into the numbers, because in a crisis, every figure counts.
Chicago's pouring millions of dollars into dealing with the migrant crisis, but where's the money being spent?
We are spending money hand over fist to assist these individuals, and yet we still have children, their parents, and the elderly sleeping on floors and bathrooms in police stations.
Chicago City Council, of course, we know approved $51 million to support migrants.
We found that more than $84 million has been already spent and already paid out with regards to things like security, food, and accommodation, but those bills are piling up.
Emergency shelters are overflowing, public housing lists extend years long, and affordable housing is but a distant dream for many. In the midst of this, the influx of migrants has stretched thin the city's already fragile safety net. Critics argue that Mayor Johnson, with his focus on welcoming migrants, has inadvertently exacerbated the housing shortage, leaving both longtime residents and new arrivals out in the cold. They point to millions allocated for temporary housing solutions, a band-aid over a gaping wound, they say. But it's not just about beds and roofs. It's about the ripple effects, neighborhoods under strain, resources redirected, and a growing sense of unease among Chicagoans who wonder if their city can bear the weight of such generosity.
Our plan for temporary emergency shelter was never meant as a long-term housing solution. But we want to give every person and every single family that has come to our city enough time to process their work authorization, find housing, start a new life in our great city. So we have made the decision to extend the shelter stay policy.
Now, this means a 60-day extension for those who arrived into the city of Chicago, into the shelter system.
The administration's strategy, or lack thereof, according to some, has come under fire. Temporary shelters like the new tent cities, while somewhat necessary, are not a solution. Critics demand a long-term plan, one that addresses the root causes of the housing crisis and provides sustainable solutions for all Chicagoans, not just those arriving by bus. In the heart of this debate is a fundamental question. How does a city balance the immediate need to shelter its newest arrivals with the long-standing needs of its residents? It's a question of priorities, of planning, and, ultimately, of policy. Governor Abbott's role. How is Texas Governor Greg Abbott shaping the national conversation on immigration? And what impact does his strategy have on cities like Chicago? Let's dive deep into the heart of the matter. At the forefront, Governor Abbott has taken a bold and controversial stance. In a move that's captured national headlines, he's initiated the buzzing of migrants from Texas directly to sanctuary cities, including Chicago.
In Eagle Pass, Texas, our Fox drone captured video of one of the largest mass illegal crossings we have ever seen there. Border Patrol sources telling Fox some 2,200 people have crossed illegally.
This decision, while divisive, illuminates the pressing strains on Texas border towns like Eagle Pass, where resources are stretched to their limits and communities are overwhelmed.
There's only one reason why this is happening, and that's because Joe Biden has eliminated all of the 4 policies that Donald Trump put in place that led to the lowest illegal border crossings in 40 years.
The primary reason is because Joe Biden is not doing his job. Joe Biden is responsible for the largest amount of illegal immigration in the history of the United States.
Governor Abbott, citing these pressures, has squarely blamed the Biden administration for what he describes as a failure to secure the border and manage immigration effectively. Proclaims Governor Abbott, framing his policy as a direct challenge to the Biden administration's immigration policies. The governor's strategy is multifaceted, leveraging the visible transfer of migrants as both a relief mechanism for Texas and a statement to the federal government. It's a tactic that has sparked fierce debate, drawing criticism for its human implications and applause for its boldness.
And U.S. officials say that they are overwhelmed at the southern border. Thousands of people are waiting to get in each day or are finding their way across the border over illegally.
In Texas, the situation is dire. Eagle Pass and similar towns face an unprecedented influx, with local infrastructure buckling under the pressure. Governor Abbott's response has been to spotlight these challenges, pushing for a reevaluation of national immigration policies, signaling a state pushed to its limits by federal inaction.
Democratic mayors of large cities are renewing calls for federal help over the ongoing migrant crisis. The mayors of Chicago, New York City, and now Denver are all requesting federal help and coordination with Texas over the growing number of asylum seekers arriving in their cities.
Chicago, under Mayor Brandon Johnson, finds itself directly impacted by Texas's maneuvers. The city, already grappling with its own challenges, must now accommodate the additional strain of migrants sent from Texas. It's a scenario that's testing the city's resolve and resources, igniting a complex dialogue on responsibility, compassion, and policy.
At dawn, the migrants covered in blankets stretched for blocks. And tonight, El Paso is under a state of emergency because city officials say they don't have enough resources to handle this.
The narrative unfolding is one of urgency and frustration, a tug of war between state and federal responsibilities in managing the migrant crisis. Governor Abbott's actions, while controversial, underscore a larger national dilemma: the balancing act between state sovereignty and federal oversight, between immediate relief and long-term solutions. His stance is a catalyst for debate, forcing a national reckoning with the realities of immigration policy and border management. Critics of the governor's strategy argue that it prioritizes political statements over human solutions, while supporters commend it for bringing national attention to a simmering crisis.
Big city mayors across the country continue to face a surge in migrant influxes as a number of states in the South along the border are sending migrants to those big metropolitan cities that declared themselves sanctuary cities.
In Chicago, Mayor Johnson navigates these turbulent waters, advocating for dignity and support for all migrants amidst the backdrop of Texas's bold gambit. As the seasons change, the implications of Governor Abbott's actions remain a focal point of national discourse. Will this strategy lead to meaningful policy shifts, or will it deepen the divides in an already polarized debate? The answers are unfolding as Texas and Chicago become emblematic of a nation grappling with the complexities of migration, governance, and humanitarianism.
The mayor is putting on pause that city new policy that kicks migrants out of shelters after 60 days. He also says the city is trying to move migrants out of the landing zone as quickly as possible to shelters. Earlier this week, there were close to 400 people living on buses. Now that number has significantly gone down.
Stay with us as we continue to track this unfolding story, a narrative that's as much about policy and politics as it is about the human dimension of the migrant crisis. From the border towns of Texas to the bustling streets of Chicago, this saga of strategy, challenge, and response is a microcosm of America's broader struggle with immigration in the 21st century. The financial issues.
The city's public data portal suggests that between September and today, the Johnson administration paid $53.9 million to support the crisis. Looking at a little over a year's time frame between October of last year and today, the city claims it's paid $138 million to various vendors, all to help support making new arrivals here on their way here to Chicago. And on a trip to D.C. back in November, Mayor Brandon Johnson told reporters the city was spending $40 million a month.
With every bus arrival, the city's coffers are put to the test. Critics argue that Mayor Johnson's administration has prioritized immediate migrant support over long-term financial stability. The question at the heart of this controversy: is Chicago risking its fiscal health for a temporary fix? Let's break down the numbers. The city's budget, already stretched thin by essential services, policing, public schools, infrastructure, now diverts millions to emergency migrant aid, housing, healthcare, food, and legal services. The costs add up and fast. Critics point to this as a misallocation of resources, favoring new arrivals over the city's own needy and vulnerable populations. But the debate doesn't end with the ledger. It extends to the very philosophy of governance. Supporters of Mayor Johnson's approach argue it's a matter of human rights, a moral obligation to help those in desperate need. Opponents, however, see it as a fiscal folly, a path that leads to budget deficits and compromised city services.
It's on the brink of a humanitarian crisis tonight, according to city leaders concerned about the hundreds of migrants arriving here each day from the Texas border. Leaders say the city can no longer foot the bill and are calling on the federal government now for immediate help.
Fiscal conservatives and watchdog groups have raised alarms, warning of the long-term implications of such spending. They caution against the burden placed on taxpayers, the potential for increased city debt, and the risk of neglecting other critical areas of need within Chicago. The controversy has sparked a broader conversation about fiscal responsibility and social welfare. How does a city balance its books while maintaining its humanity? Mayor Johnson faces the unenviable task of navigating these turbulent fiscal waters, deciding which courses merit investment and which must be left uncharted. Amidst this fiscal scrutiny, one thing remains clear: the decisions made today will shape Chicago's tomorrow. Will the city emerge as a beacon of compassion and resilience, or will it find itself mired in financial quagmires, struggling to provide for all its residents? The path ahead in the migrant crisis.
How can you come into a community and dump people in our community like this? This is not fair.
The city's pressing migrant crisis in the spotlight now more than ever, and Southside residents are fired up over plans to put up tents.
As the nation stands at a pivotal juncture in its handling of the immigration crisis, the path forward presents a complex array of challenges and choices for Chicago, the Biden administration, and America as a whole. Let's dissect the options, implications, and the critical viewpoints surrounding the current policies, especially the contentious idea of closing the border completely. The migrant crisis has put an unprecedented strain on cities like Chicago, forcing local governments to confront the immediate needs of new arrivals, amidst an ongoing debate over national immigration policies. The Biden administration, criticized for its handling of the situation, faces calls for drastic measures, including the complete closure of the U.S. border. Option 1. Closing the border.
Now to the latest in the migrant crisis. President Biden reportedly considering executive actions that would block migrants from seeking asylum at the border.
Pros. Proponents argue that closing the border would stem the tide of new arrivals, alleviating the immediate pressures on border states and destination cities like Chicago. It's seen as a measure to regain control of the situation and reassess the nation's immigration policies. Cons. Critics highlight the humanitarian, economic, and logistical challenges such a move would entail. A complete closure could exacerbate the crisis in border regions, disrupt economic ties, and undermine America's standing as a beacon of hope and opportunity. Option 2. Strengthening border security while reforming immigration policies. This approach advocates for a more nuanced solution, focusing on enhancing security measures to prevent illegal crossings while simultaneously working towards comprehensive immigration reform. The goal is to create a more sustainable, humane system that addresses the root causes of migration, such as violence and poverty in home countries. Critics of the current administration argue that there has been a lack of decisive action on both fronts, leading to the current state of affairs. Option 3. Expanding support and resources for affected cities. For cities like Chicago, additional federal support and resources could significantly mitigate the impact of the crisis. This includes funding for housing, healthcare, and integration programs for migrants. The challenge lies in balancing federal support with the need for a coherent, long-term strategy that addresses the broader issues of immigration and asylum policies. Option 4. Engaging in international cooperation. Addressing the root causes of migration requires international cooperation and support for the countries most affected by violence, poverty, and political instability. By investing in development and stability abroad, the U.S. can help reduce the push factors driving migration. Critics point out that such efforts, while necessary, are long-term solutions and do not address the immediate challenges at the border and in cities across the country. The debate over closing the border completely is emblematic of the broader challenges America faces in crafting an effective response to the migrant crisis. It underscores the tension between security concerns and humanitarian obligations, between national interests and global responsibilities. As we look forward, The choices made by Chicago, the Biden administration, and policymakers will not only shape the immediate response to the crisis, but also define America's role on the world stage in the decades to come. The path forward demands a delicate balance of pragmatism, compassion, and foresight, with the understanding that the solutions chosen will impact not just the migrants and the cities that welcome them, but the very fabric of the nation itself. In navigating these uncharted waters, the need for comprehensive, forward-thinking policies has never been more critical. The decisions made today will set the course for America's immigration policy, its city's responses to new arrivals, and the nation's identity as a land of opportunity and refuge in a changing world. Remember to subscribe to stay tuned on the newest crime across the world. If you enjoyed the video, drop a like, and if you have questions, put them in the comments. Thanks for watching.